Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc Business Show.
Depending on what you're plugging into and how much they open up, what we try and do with our APIs, get access to as much of the data as is available, and then bring that in, and it kind of gets transformed into like a tableized view, so you can start working on it. And then from a developer or a designer perspective, you can then start working on the data models. And we have various sort of tools and capabilities at that level to cater for trying to make data wrangling as easy as possible.
One of data science's dirty little secrets is the time spent data wrangling. That is, accessing the data and then transforming it into a form compatible with your data tools and the chosen analytical and learning models you're going to use. Most agree this can take a full 75 to 80% of data science time. In this episode of the IoT Business Show, I speak with Adam Meyer about data access and form when shopping at your local datamart.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc Business Show. This show is for business leaders and managers employing the Internet of Things for their business or the business of their customers. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair, and I interview the industry's leading authorities to find out how they use IoT to improve business and create value. If you like this show, subscribe to it on iTunes and go to IoTinc.com to check out my complimentary articles, videos, meetups, and webinars. This is the second episode in our mini-series on data marketplaces or data exchanges, or as I like to call them, data marts. External data is strategic, and this is an emerging form of external data I think everyone should know about. By the time we get through these episodes, you'll have a good idea of how to use them within your IoT business. This episode is made possible by the IoT Inc Certified IoT Professional, or ICIP, online training and certification program. Become a certified IoT professional by taking the program's 3 courses: ICIP Technology, ICIP Business, and ICIP Strategy and Digital Transformation. Details of which can be found at www.iot-inc.com/training. This week's ICIP graduate shoutout is to Angela Naso. Hey Angela, if you're looking for an IoT boss to work with, you can check out her LinkedIn profile on the front page of IoT-Inc.com. With me today on the IoT show is Adam Meyer. Adam is a senior manager of technical product marketing at Qlik, specifically focused on IoT and the GDPR. Adam has over 20 years of B2B customer experience within the IT, automotive, and manufacturing sectors. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bruce. Pleasure to be here.
So what have you been working on lately? What's been making you burn the candle, so to speak?
Burn the candle. So as you say, there's sort of 2 primary areas of focus in my role here at Qlik is around IoT. So I'm talking a lot with customers, not only of our software, but they're in their own IoT ecosystem and building out sort of real use cases. So that's really good. That's sort of building up my experience points, as it were, when it comes to IoT. And the other side, the coin as well, is the general data protection regulation, the good old GDPR. We're in the post-GDPR world now.
Yeah. Is that what we're in now, the post-GDPR world?
That's right. Everyone was talking about it before that 25th of May, that really important date, which I thought was the launch of the Han Solo movie. But 25th of May has been and gone now, and so it's
and the world hasn't come crashing down, has it?
Exactly. No, it's. I like to think of it as a starting line. Really, everyone was talking about it as a deadline, but I do firmly believe. I mean, there's going to be a lot of pushing and shoving, and it will take a little while to get there. But I think we will be in a better place for it as well. And you'll see similar regulations happening, not just in Europe now, but around the rest of the world as well. I was reading about there's a new law being planned in California to come in 2020 that's sort of taking elements of the GDPR. And it's all a good thing, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, it's all about protecting yours and mine sort of personal information, making companies more sort of responsible and accountable for it. And at the same time, giving us a bit more enhanced rights in terms of having a say in how our own personal data is used. I think it's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And some companies like Microsoft are actually, implementing the GDPR across the world. And I think, it's just, we've spoken about this on the podcast before. Everyone listening has heard, or if they haven't, you can go back and listen to the GDPR episodes. But because unless you're selling just within your own country, if you have any EU customers, then it's going to affect you. And so this is eventually over time, the EU is just leading the way, and everyone's going to have to follow in this direction. And it's interesting because I'm already finding it even with my small business. I'm a 2-person company here, but even within my small business, I'm now having questions on am I following GDPR, for consulting agreements and for training deployments within companies. So within 4 months, 3 months, 4 months already, it's even affecting small companies like mine. So it has to be having an effect to your company, obviously, and everyone that's listening. So yeah, I think it's a good idea. And it's kind of interesting. I suppose those skill sets of IoT and GDPR are exactly what you need when you're selling data, or at least when you're selling data and when you're transforming the data. So give us a little bit more history on your IoT background. Is this new for you? Have you been doing it for a little while? How did you get into it?
I've sort of been following IoT for many years now. So I'd probably at a personal level, I'd describe myself as very much the sort of IoT enthusiast, as it were. Okay. And seeing the development how it goes. So I'm very inquisitive. I've got an analytical mind, obviously working in a company like Qlik, but from quite a creative street that needs to be sort of fed at a time. So personal level, I sort of started tinkering around with some sensor technology like Arduinos and things like that, but also actively using the commercial stuff that's out there as well. So I try and keep as healthy as possible, so I can eat as much as possible. So I use the sports trackers that are out there. I've got a smart thermostat, which is one of the first things I think I've got in our home, just to have a play around with. Multiple voice control systems, and I'm always tinkering with those, much to the annoyance of my long-suffering partner. Bless her. I'm trying to sort of experiment with how we can do things better. But ultimately, like I was saying at the beginning, my experience points have really sort of started to increase by talking to sort of customers that are really building out their IoT ecosystems and really finding some interesting use cases, predominantly in the business-to-business space. But what really fascinates me most about sort of IoT is not just now you can put a sensor on anything and really measure just about everything out there, whether that be like measuring a paint thickness on a robot, spray paint on a car production line, telemetry data from commercial vehicles being fed into trying to optimize and make fleet management more efficient, and even really cool examples like measuring soil moisture in the ground to help things grow better. But it's all of that is generating a huge amount of data, and that's the bit that also really gives me a real buzz, because there's no doubt we're definitely living in this sort of analytics economy, right, where data is on its own, it's just kind of like a natural resource, but by putting analytics over it and turning it into insights, that's when you can start driving transformation and doing things better. And I think in the IoT world, particularly when I'm talking to not just our customers but other people out there in the real world, in events, in IoT events and things like that, they're really getting the most value out of their IoT data when they start combining it with other data like external data, for example.
Absolutely. No, and I agree with that. And now, do you buy into data as the new oil, or do you have a better analogy for everyone listening?
Definitely data is new oil. That is a tried and tested and well used. But then I like the analytics economy piece in terms of data is that natural resource, and it needs to be, you need to put that analytics over it.
It needs to be refined,
really
right?
Yeah, exactly. You need to refine it and turn it into real value. Exactly.
Right. So why don't you give everyone a high-level picture of Qlik, and then kind of how the data marketplace fits into it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Qlik, as an organization, we've been going since the early 90s. We're now a global company. We originated in Sweden, so we're a global company. We're Swedish sold, as we like to say. But we offer a data analytic platform, basically, to allow you to really start sort of making sense out of your data, start exploring it without any boundaries, and really get into those actionable insights much quicker. And without the risk of being too commercial, one of the things that sort of makes us stand out from the rest out there, our real secret sauce, is our Associative Engine. And that's it's unique to us, but it's the ability to combine multiple disparate data sets together and start seeing relationships within the data and really allow that free form discovery. So it's not just adding a sort of visualization layer on top, it's the ability to really sort of explore that. And as part of that whole platform, we also have a data marketplace as well, which is essentially like data as a service. In our case, it's a pre-curated, modeled kind of data, so you can get things like weather, demographics, currency exchange, financial information, as we've added recently, and more healthcare packages are coming in as well. But what that means is you can then bring that in to your existing data. You put your own data into our platform. It's nothing to do with us. But yeah, you can start combining that with other external data and start generating more and better and greater insights out of it, and therefore take better decisions to become that much more data driven as well.
No, I mean, I buy into that. Now, what were you calling the process or your special sauce of fusing the multiple data sets together?
So we call it the Associative Engine. So in a traditional BI world, SQL based, you generally have to create sort of linear paths to go down. So you model the data. It's very much hierarchical data. You almost have to sort of know or think about the question that's going to be asked before you start modeling. And as you go down in that traditional world, deeper into the data, you start sort of leaving data behind in order to sort of join the data up and come to a conclusion. And once you get the answer, you get the answer that you want probably, but then more often than not, that will generate more questions on the answer that you've been given, and then you have to go back almost to the beginning and go down those steps again in a different direction to get their answer. In the associative world or modern BI, that's when we start using sort of associations, building relationships with the data, kind of automatically using these sort of smart algorithms, as it were. And you can start anywhere. You don't have to start in this kind of linear regression. All the data sort of is connected and related, as it were, and then you can just sort of freely explore that data. And with each Qlik, which is where the name comes from, we're recalculating, as it were, on the fly and giving you the kind of insights as you drill or zoom further into the data.
So I'm trying to get my head around this. So the past, you're saying, is more these linear data pipelines, and you kind of define the steps along the way. Here you're saying you're making associations between, I don't know, this is where I'm falling off the cliff a little bit, but you're making associations between the different sources of data. So what's different?
Yes. So where there's sort of where there's a relationship and connections, rather than you can obviously in the modeling make up the joins, but the Associative Engine has the ability to find relationships in the data and start connecting them automatically, and then by doing that, one, you get a much more sort of free form exploration. But the other key point is versus the linear world is you don't leave any data behind, so we can show you what is related, and conversely, kind of on the screen, what isn't related, or what isn't connected. So a simple example is say you're doing your typical sort of quarterly sales results or something like that, not only can you see, as per in the traditional world, who's your highest performing sales rep or what's the most selling product, you can equally see, what isn't, and that the more data that you have in there, what isn't selling so well in various different regions or categories or geographics, or even sales rep aren't selling the highest selling product, for example, things like that. Whereas in a linear world, those kind of reports would have to be kind of pre-written and then queried at a time. Whereas if you wanted to see what wasn't working as well, that would be a kind of separate report, and sometimes almost harder to do, depending on how complex the data structure is.
So I understand the association, and there's a number of ways of doing that. One of them is using machine learning, and I think it's a variable association or something like that, where it does look and see where there's relationships, between different data sources. So, okay, I get that part. But the broader picture part, isn't that just exposing more data on some sort of a dashboard, or is it something more than that?
Yeah, ultimately, it's through some sort of dashboard. That's kind of like the front end, and that's where we can put our visualizations. And then each of those sort of visualizations that you create, whether it's a bar chart, scatter plot, or a map, for example, is kind of explorable. So you can start sort of clicking its touch interface and responsive design as well, so you can sort of see it on any device. So you can start exploring the data that way. It's an open, extensible platform as well, so we can plug in to decision engines, and typically R and Python are the most popular, but also we have some, we've got a partner network of about 1,700 strong partners out there, and a lot of them are technical partners, and we're seeing a lot of machine learning integrations that our customers are doing as well. So it's very flexible out there as well. So you can have the data pushed out to these machine engines, not only use our secret sauce, but then as your data starts getting more complex or more further reach, as it were, you can push data out automatically, have it computed and calculated, and then push back in literally at the speed of thought, as we say. So as each click happens, everything's sort of being recalculated on the fly. So I've got a kind of example. I can try and bring that to life a bit more for you. One of that. Sure. Bringing it back to sort of IoT and external data as well. So there's a really interesting I think I could still call them a startup company. They've been going for a couple of years now, but Measure.io, that's MESUR.io, just to put that. Now they're operating really in the world of smart agriculture, but they've got a system called Earthstream, and what they've done is basically they've created their thing, their sensor that plugs into the ground, and that measures all kinds of things from soil moisture, temperature, pH levels, light levels, and it has GPS functionality as well, so it knows where it is when you plug it in the ground. They've created their own sort of IoT platform that they've built on AWS that can start ingesting this data. So the more sort of Earthstream devices that you plug in, you can start getting a much better picture of what's going on. And that literally what happens is their platform utilizes Qlik as the front end essentially. So their target audience are people like growers, your farmers. They also have a really interesting take up in turf management for golf courses, where they're not necessarily a traditional sort of BI analysis, business intelligence analysis that makes up sort of our typical audience. But they certainly know what they need to know about growing things or maintaining the turf. So they get this visualized representation of their basically the land that they've planted these Earthstream devices in. So they're pulling in, Measure.io are pulling in external data, satellite data, drone data, flyby data that the USDA brings in. They got Esri sort of tying as well. All of this is kind of working in the background, and it displays this map, so you can actually literally see dots on a map, and each dot kind of represents your device, and you can see where the areas of attention are, where the dry spots are, where the ones that are a bit more don't need as much attention, things like that. They've also plugged in weather data as well, so you can start. How often have you driven past a field and you kind of see the sprinklers on when it's just started to rain? So what they've started to do is get a little bit smarter, and if sort of rain is forecasted while the sprinklers are on, or maybe there's a scheduler for the sprinklers to come on, they can either do it a manual way and kick off alerts to their users so they can plan accordingly and not use the sprinklers, or they can even integrate in. It's quite, again, they've created an open platform themselves, integrate into irrigation systems and start taking that automatically as well. So there's a real use case there of saving water. And in one particular golf course area where they were operating quite a highly regulated area, they saw savings around about 35%, pretty much from day one of integrating or starting this system. So it's bringing all of that external data all into one place, as it were, that can be consumed literally at their users' fingertips. So that's quite a powerful example, I think.
No, and I agree. And I think, first of all, it's pretty cool. I thought you were going to go more smart ag, but the golf course example, saving the water. It kind of drives me nuts when I see, the water being, sprinkled while it's raining, or even when it's at like the top of the day. And in California here, it gets really hot in the middle of the day, and that's definitely not when you want to be watering your crops or your grass for your golf course. But I think what's important here, though, is that we've got two different sources of data, and this is kind of the motto. I guess the thinking behind the data marts is that you've got the internal data, which is great, and so it sounds like there's these devices that they put into the ground, and they've got all their internal sensors, and they're going to grab that data, and it sounds like they maybe built their own platform, which is okay, but they've built it on top of AWS. But then they have the external data, and you've mentioned the weather data. You mentioned you also mentioned, what's the other external data that they use?
There's quite a few there. So they've got satellite images, so they can do multiple layers. And I think they've packaged this up differently, but I'm not a great expert on this, but I understand the USDA do sort of several data packages in terms of satellite imagery of the ground, false color infrared data. I think they've got drone data you can plug into it as well, and this sort of I think most of it's brought in from flyby data as well. But my understanding really around that is that you can then start seeing, zoom into your land using Esri data as well. So you've got like the correct images, as it were, in terms of mapping. And then you can see what your ground conditions are like. And that's supposed to be, that is quite vitally important, not only for growers to see which areas need attention, for example, but start bringing that more into, from rural areas to urban areas. And you can start seeing, city planners could start using it in parks. Smart cities is another interesting area in the IoT that I'm also following as well. So this kind of information is quite critical for just growing conditions and establishing greener growth.
Yeah, and it's critical for everyone listening here, is because it creates more value. And in the case of using your internal data, you could almost call that like a telematics system or a connected product. And I will often contrast just to make a point, a connected product with an IoT product. And the one way of differentiating an IoT product from, let's say, a telematic product or a connected product is that it uses sources of data that are available on the internet, not just the data that's coming up from the sensors. And then the second part of it is that transformation of that data into something useful, which is your analytics platform. So super important. Now, are they getting this external data through your data marketplace, or is it coming in a different way?
I think in this particular use case, it is coming in a different way. So I think the main sources is like the USDA and a few other things. They might be using our weather data, but I have to check to confirm that. Another thing that they're bringing in as well, and I don't know the source of this, but I know they're also bringing in from a mobile device perspective, pests and diseases as well. So you could be, from a farmer perspective, you could be on the ground walking through the crops, and as you start physically examining your products, you've got a whole list of sort of pests and diseases that's linked in to that whole package as well. So they're adding data sort of more and more as they go along, as well as they grow. But ultimately, their aim is to have, like I said, adding value, but creating an impact in terms of the whole agriculture world of using that data for good, really, and making the world a better place, growing things better, more efficiently, using less resources, and minimising the waste. And ultimately, putting my soothsayer cap on, start getting into sort of more cleaner crops as well.
And
food chain,
and better putting greens.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. They're even talking of plugging these Earthstream devices, the sensors, onto gold buggies as well. So from a real estate management, where your buggies are. But they were talking about, I don't know if they've actually done this yet, but theoretically they were talking about if you've got like a new patch of turf that's quite fragile, or it's very saturated, so it's quite a delicate state, they can try and sort of detour the buggies, not to drive over and damage those kind of places, or at the very least the ground attendant can go out and start marking out the areas that potentially could be more damage than they realise, because they've got the data coming in from literally from the ground.
Yeah, no, I like it. And I think an important point to make here is a top-down thinking. And just like internal data, there's basically sensors for everything. So it's not a question of, I know about this sensor, so I'm going to start bringing it in. It's more, what's the problem I'm trying to solve, or what's what's the outcome I'm trying to achieve for my customer? What's the information I need to achieve that outcome? And then what's the data I need to create that information I need to create that outcome? Now, this top-down thinking should be used for your internal sensors, but now, for external data that's available on the internet, there's so much of it. You should also be thinking top-down as well, and then going out and seeing if that data is available. So I'm just making the point. I know it's cool to be able, the pest control or the pest data and disease data is very cool. Maybe that is something that kind of came out, later down the line. But when you are trying to create value, you should be thinking top down, and then going out there and say, okay, I need this data to create this information, to create this value. So where can I find it? Some of it's going to be internal, and some of it's going to be external. And this is why I think what I call data marts, or these data marketplaces, are so important, because it's a whole extra rich set of data that's available to you once you're on the internet. And once you virtualize your product, your system, or environment, whatever that case may be, it now can act as software. It can interface as software on the internet. And that's what I want to talk about now is how is this mechanically done? How do they, let's say that they're looking for this weather data, perhaps this is weather forecast data. Of course, they can go to different sources, and they could go, if they have a deployment in South Africa, they have a deployment in California, they have an deployment in the UK, they could go to the individual data sources and grab it. But they're going to have to transform that data. They're going to have to package it. They're going to have to effectively wrangle it in some way that they can ingest it. Now, I'm assuming, a data mart or a data marketplace like yours will bring in these different sources of data, but it's not just bringing in the sources of data. I'm assuming it's also massaging that data so that it is uniform, or that it can be accessed in a consistent way. Is that right? Or maybe you can add a little bit more color to that statement.
Yeah, definitely. So from the package that we offer, absolutely, it's kind of curated, so you can literally just bring it in, and it will slot into your data model with very minimal data wrangling, if none at all. In terms of connections, we from our platform, we call it open and extensible. Really, the key is around APIs, and I think the successful data markets out there need to have some good open and really flexible APIs to connect in there, and then it's a case of understanding that data source and the connections that you need to bring in. So from our perspective, we try and have as many pre-built connectors as we can. We say we're sort of data agnostic, but obviously so many different data sources out there. RESTful and REST sort of state API connectors are pretty much the Swiss Army knife of connectors out there, and that's I see that sort of as the backbone of connecting into there. And then, like you said, there are sort of other sort of data markets out there that are literally just sort of straight tables, and that can be quite challenging in collecting it. So I've got an example that I heard of quite recently, and called pretty much around the smart city space. So I don't know if you're aware of the C40 cities sort of program. No. This is quite interesting. So this is something we're working on as part of our CSR, our corporate and social responsibility piece. It's a really quite a fascinating story. So C40s is a program that's set up of multiple cities around the globe. I think there's some sort of program around 96 of the mega cities globally that are in here, and their whole mission is around reducing climate change, carbon emissions around the world, basically. So they have some stats saying that cities aren't 100% responsible for the climate change, but they do have a majority of the impacts where they're densely populated, they're built around rivers the majority of the times, and obviously that's where the sort of pollution stems from. So they've got this mission in terms of reducing carbon emissions. They are doing this all around data. So essentially they're sort of operating one big, or they're ultimately they're going to be into this one big data market piece that they'll be able to offer. So they're looking at things like building emissions and pollution that are coming off of buildings, water usage, energy usage being a major contributing factor to that, transportation, anything you can think of in a city they're measuring. The example I'm trying to zone into is what's happened quite recently is the city of Boston, like many cities, not just in the US but globally as well, are starting to open up their data sets that they're collecting. Obviously they're sort of pre-curated, as it were, anonymized and things like that. But as part of their sort of kind of compliancy, or part of the sort of right for information that most cities and governments are following, you're having these sort of publicly open available data sources. So Boston, if I can try and cut to the chase, have a mission of being carbon neutral by 2050. They are aware that their buildings, just within the city of Boston, accounts for pretty much 75% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And they've got a system or a data market, essentially, I think we can call it, called BERDO, which is around Building Energy Reporting Disclosure Ordinance. Kind of rolls off the tongue, but the point is, it's a program where all the buildings, buildings owners and facility management companies that are collecting data have a responsibility to input their own energy and water usage into this system, and then Boston City has the responsibility to then disclose that information, and they do that online. Now they've been collecting this data around 2013, I think. By 2015 they published it online, but it was pretty much straight table, so it was open available information, and then there was a lot of work you had to do to bring it in. Now where we come in, or where this sort of story kind of gets interesting, is they've got a need. How do they extract value out of that data? I mean, they're sitting on a hoard of data. It's not just for them. They want to get this out to other audiences as well. So their main target audience, it would be the city officials. So this is like your planner and analysts inside Boston City, the building owners themselves and the facility managements, and also residents as well. How do you get laymen on the street to get access to the data and actually get value out of it as well? So they're working with it with sort of four main targets, as far as I understand it. First and foremost, it's actually kind of using the data to track the compliance and targets. So they've got this target to reach carbon neutral by 2050. They need to be able to monitor and measure the output of the buildings and see, who are the sort of the heaviest polluters, and then be able to manage them as a second point. And this is all about education rather than, I often call it the carrot and the stick. So rather than using the stick to punish the polluters, it's more about education, saying, okay, what's the deal here? And they need to get into quite granular detail as well, because not every building's the same. They have different categories. They operate in different ways. So you can just imagine it's a whole load of messy data. And because you've got multiple people of different skill sets representing all the different buildings, putting data in, you can imagine there's quite a lot of messy data in there.
Sure.
So we were involved in a hackathon, which we kind of opened up. We have this event every year called Connections. That's our sort of biggest major event. This year we had, I think, well over 4,000 people attend, majority of customers, but we also have sort of new people coming in as well. But the hackathons are really cool because we open up, this time we worked with C40 cities and the city of Boston, and they said, we've got this problem, exactly like you were saying, how do we get real value out of this data, and how do we reach the target audiences that we want to reach? And the solution that came out of it was actually using the dashboards and the interactive pieces that our platform applies. You can start zooming in, you could see who the highest polluters were, and we've got these sort of like smart scatter plot charts they put in. I think it's some of the demos are publicly available, but ultimately what they want to do is make this also a portal, as well as a portal that you can connect to. But in order to understand the data before you even connect to it, they kind of want to have this front end, so you can start exploring the data. And one of the interesting things that come out of it that they're starting to implement now is the ability to benchmark buildings' performance against other buildings of a similar type, for example. So not only is that useful to the owners of the buildings, you kind of get this gamification thing going where they can see where do they stand with other people and what do they need to do to access to change things. But think about opening that up to the residents as well. And if you can do that in a sort of simplified but meaningful way, you could be living in a particular building that might be the worst offender or needs some improvements, and you can then start thinking and potentially deliver insights into what small changes an individual can make that could have a bigger impact further on. Or even, I don't think this was what they thought of, but I'm thinking of it, if I was thinking of moving into Boston, particularly in maybe younger generations, might actually have a preference. I don't want to live in a dirty building, not just the internal, but the pollution that's coming out. I want to live in a clean building, and that's
small
that
footprint.
Could be a real small footprint, exactly that. So not only is it having a much wider impact on the environment, but it's also kind of a disrupting markets like rental markets or building management. It's quite interesting. And that's just the energy and water usage from buildings, and there's a whole lot of other data sets out there. Like I said, the traffic and transport side of things, parking information, congestions, that leads to high emissions, waste management, all these kind of stuff. So Boston is kind of acting like the template, and what they want to do is pretty much as a result of the hackathon and the other good sort of solutions that came out of it, they're building this kind of front end to the portal, and then they're going to try and use that as a template and push that out to share it with the other cities within those 96 mega cities that can then take that and use it for their own advantage as well. So it's phenomenal and really interesting to see the output that's going to happen from that.
Yeah, no, and you bring up an important point, and this is, it's all this messy data. If you're looking at whether it's, first of all, all incremental value from an IoT product comes from transforming its data into useful information. That transformation process is what your platform does and others do, where you're using analytics or you're going to be using AI to transform it. Now, the reality is, though, if you look at that entire, let's call it pipeline, or in this case, a nonlinear pipeline, around 70%, maybe even 75% of the time is doing this, what we're calling the data wrangling, the regularization of the data, the normalization of the data, the sparseness of the data, the units of the data. This is a lot of work. And so I would think, if there's a way that the the data marketplace can reduce that 70% down to 20% or just down, I think that is a super important metric for evaluating data marketplaces. I mean, of course, like you said, there are some that just offer tables and tables of data, and that is like you're just collecting it off your own sensors and you're going to have to do something with it. So, in that sense, in being able to do this normalization, this regularization, or this data wrangling to be able to start doing the processing, what has to be done? I mean, the thing that immediately comes to my mind is going to be the metadata that's describing, the data on the data, describing what is this 16.25. Can you talk a little bit more about that 75% or that 70% of analytics and the relationship between that and the data marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit more. If I go back to the Boston story I was just telling, one of the winners was Snyder Electric, and they were actually talking about using the outliers in the messy data to try and use that to clean it up, rather than particularly when it's data coming in from various different sources. They were using the analytics to show the outliers that potentially could be messy, but rather than completely clean them up, they'd exclude them from the sort of main visualizations, but give you the ability to drill down in there to see what actually is the driver for it, what's the cause, as it were. So then this is again going back to sort of like the carrot and the stick. They could then be used for the contributors of the data. In this case, we've got multiple data sources coming in as, again, an education piece. So they've now got the ability to sort of zoom into the data, see where the outliers are, and actually say, well, no, it is a real messy data, or actually, that's a human error or input error piece as well. So it's kind of using the analytics to clean up the data.
And let's talk a little bit more about your RESTful API then. You use the RESTful API to grab a piece of data, a table of data, or whatever of data. What else are you getting besides that raw data when using your API?
That really depends on the source data. Depending on what you're plugging into and how much they open up, what we try and do with our APIs, get access to as much of the data as is available, and then bring that in, and it kind of gets transformed into like a tableized view, so you can start working on it. And then from a developer or a designer perspective, you can then start working on the data models. And we have various sort of tools and capabilities at that level to cater for trying to make data wrangling as easy as possible. We were kind of formed on that single belief that everybody should have access to analytics at whatever skill set you're at, and we're, as well as catering for the high-end expert, we're trying to cater for essentially the likes of me to try and understand data and get up to speed to insights as quick as possible.
Now, there is a standardization to a certain extent with the API, for how you access it. Now, are you trying to standardize the data? I know you're bringing in data from different sources. Are you keeping them in their native format? And when I say format, I just mean more data structure. Or are you trying to standardize the data structure so that when you're using your API, you also kind of know the structure of the data that's behind it, or you don't have to transform that into a different structure? Because at some point, there has to be, going back to that normalization, the regularization of data, that step has to happen. And what I'm trying to understand is how much of it is happening at the data marketplace, or is it still happening within the data system of the customer?
Right, yeah. So in the data marketplace, there's we call them topical packages that are kind of pre-formed, so you can just bring them in and they're ready to use. So you don't really have to wrangle that data. You just choose whether it's weather, demographics, or whatever package you want. So from the data marketplace, there's a kind of finite set of data sources that you can use. Even though we're adding to it over time. With the and that's kind of what I was referring to, like the pre-built connector, if you like. We have other connectors for like Oracle, SAP, Hadoop, Apache, those kind of things. The REST API then is kind of like the Swiss Army knife as a backup, or where there isn't a pre-built connector. And the other thing to mention is with the pre-built connectors, we are adding to on a consistent basis as well, whether that's the on-prem solution or on cloud. You're getting access to more and more connectors. As we come along. It's just trying to make it as easy as possible to connect to those data sources.
Okay, so then in your vernacular, then the pre-built connectors is this sort of packaging of the data so that they can access it directly. I guess I'm just trying to think it through here. So the difference between the pre-built connector and the free-for-all one is what? Maybe I'll just ask that.
I guess with the pre-built connector, you know your data source, you're connecting to it, and then it's the ability to start working on that data. You don't necessarily have to bring all that data into Qlik. It's just we're an in-memory tool, so it's a kind of can be persistent or non-persistent basis. Whereas, and then if you need to connect to any other data source, then you've got the REST connector there that can do it. So, for example, there's a web page, for example, to keep it quite simple. You can hook into a web page, and what it will try and do is bring that into kind of like a commoner format. If it's already in a format, on the web page, then fine. But if not, we'll try and do that. There's obviously not every data can be transformed depending on the web page structure. But then if you're trying to plug into it, then normally there'd be some value there. You see what I mean? So we try and make it as from unstructured to as structured possible, just in terms of commoner level that then you can then start working on from there if you need to.
No, but that's a big thing to go from unstructured to structured. I mean, that saves a lot of time. Okay, let's pop up and talk more about the business side of things. What's the business model? How is the data valued? How is it bought? How is it sold? Take us through those through those issues.
Yeah, I mean, first start with our solution first. We have a freemium model, so you can sort of prove value, try before you buy, if you like, and then the paid for service is subscription basic, which are trying to keep it nice and easy, simple as possible. There are sort of other providers out there that you can go through directly on. I mean, another thing I'm noticing in data sources in general is it's a little bit like streaming video channels. You can either choose to subscribe to individual channels, or there's a platform or a kind of service provider that you can go to that then bundles it up into those channels, into packages for you, and you kind of then buy the whole package or pick and choose depending on the flexibility. But it does seem to be predominantly subscription based. We're also living in this subscription economy, aren't we, where we just want to, no longer want to own things. We just want to sort of subscribe to it, consume it, use it as long as we need to, and then see what happens from there. But I think it's still quite early days, even though data markets themselves have been around for a while. I think we've probably once things start getting more connected and people start seeing, common ways of doing things, or it's going to be like a light bulb moment, something's going to click, and we're going to see some more sort of monetization models to come, like whether it's a kind of usage based or connector based or volume based. I'm not quite sure, but one of the earliest examples I sort of remember when I started getting into sort of the IoT sphere was like a lift company who was using their data to obviously maintain the lifts, but they were seeing that they were quite quickly picking up trends on sort of peak periods of time. So from the lifts where it gets from various floors to the ground floor, and there was value the days before Uber. There was value to selling that to taxi companies, particularly in sort of high density sort of city areas, so they could plan ahead and try and meet the demand, and likewise. Not have too many taxis there when it's not needed. But then that starts opening up more and more when looking at the smart cities and smart building piece, where that lift data is also starting to be used for productivity information and efficiency in terms of looking at how popular floors are, or mixing it in with other data like room occupancy or room bookings and things like that. If there's more people on particular floors, and have the lift parked there rather than all the way up the top, so it's less wear and tear on the lift, therefore less maintenance, less waiting time for us as individuals at the lift, and therefore more productivity, less stress and things like that. Another sort of example I was thinking of was like a commercial vehicle company. We were talking about telemetry data, and they did a very similar sort of thing to the Boston thing, where they were using telemetry data, sort of testing and also field maintenance of vehicles, and then they were able to sort of monetize that for insurance companies, so they could work out sort of premiums and risk management and things like that. But also it was becoming quite interesting for fleet managers, not only to get access to their own fleet, but then to compare that to what's happening out in the rest of the market, and see sort of how their vehicles are stacking up, and that could start creating potential opportunities of, do I need to trade in a vehicle quicker, or is there a particular fault there coming up? So it's kind of like generating win-win scenarios for both the provider and the user as well. So I still think, I dare say it's still early days, and I think we might see more monetization models to come.
Yeah, and just to be clear, there's kind of two monetization models that we're kind of conflating here. We've got the monetization model of getting the original data, and then we got the monetization model of selling that, packaging that data, transforming that data, and selling it to the customer. What I'm interested in is a monetization model for the data market. And you mentioned it's basically a subscription now, but is that subscription based on what? Is it time? Is it bits? Is it what is the subscription based on?
Drawing on our model as experience, basically it's access. Subscription is based on access to a particular package.
So time then. So they have access to a certain amount of time. Yeah, so it doesn't matter how much they eat. It's just a time based.
Time based. Exactly.
And is it on a per stream, or is it like you were using the analogy, which I thought was good, of like a cable package here in the U.S., where you don't just subscribe to one channel? Not that I'd like this, but I would like to subscribe to one channel, because there's only a few I watch. But in any case, is it a time for all data that you charge by, or is it a time per data stream?
So we have a per data stream model, and we also, I think, have a kind of packaged up deal as well. So we have various different flavors of where we have our package on-prem or in the cloud, and what we're starting to do is kind of bundle it up as well. So if you get access to paid for on the cloud side of things, and there's certain packages you get access to by default. So there is a bit of a variety there, and it depends on what suits your needs.
Okay, but on the cloud side, is that then still time-based, or is it now, are you measuring the data that's going in and out?
Still time-based. Still time.
Okay, so it's all time-based.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure all our subscriptions are time-based at the moment.
Okay, no, that helps, because for everyone listening, then they have to think about their business model. If your business model is time-based, and then that gives them their data. Mm-hmm. Now, are you sourcing all the data? Are you buying data from data sources? So now I'm wondering kind of how you're getting your data, or you and I won't say just because it's not easy, but are you just accessing available data and then packaging it, or are you buying for free data, or are you buying data and then selling it? Which is the model that you're using?
It's been both, depending on the topical package. So some of the data out there, for example, like the weather data, is kind of freely available, but it's not packaged up, and you got to sort of wrangle it in. So the value there is, so it's pre-wrangled for you. All of the packages are pre-wrangled for you. Some are coming in from particular providers, like the healthcare side of things. For example, there's particular providers out there that are used quite frequently in the healthcare world, but exactly like you said, there's a lot of work involved in wrangling them to bring that in. So the value in getting it through our data market in this respect is it's already kind of pre-wrangled, and it's in a state for you to immediately use and consume and start getting access to those insights.
So then, okay, so you're doing this wrangling, which I agree, it's a lot of value. Are you paying for some of the data that you're then wrangling and then selling, or is it freely available data that you're packaging, wrangling, and then selling?
It depends. So we do work with third parties, and I believe there are some sort of contracts in play for those, but we try and sort of keep that separate. So there's the contract between us and the third party, and then by putting it through the process and pre-preparing it, as it were, it then comes in as a topical package. So you get consistency across the board. That's the main value with with our data marketplace in this respect. Whichever package you go for, whichever one you kind of need to use, is coming in the same consistent, reliable format.
Yeah. No, and it was just more out of curiosity, because at the end, it doesn't matter. I mean, they're going to be paying you, and then whatever you do in the back, you do in the back, as long as they're finding the value, they find the value. And the same thing is, I'm going back to this, if you look at I'm going to call it a pipeline, but let's say it's a nonlinear pipeline, but the data pipeline for data science, there's that wrangling does take up 75% of the time. So if you can, where I see a big value for a data marketplace is reducing that 75%, and that's what you're talking about doing. So, and then charging them on a subscription based on time. And there's a lot of value there. I mean, there's a lot of value, because the alternative, even if it is free data, is you need to then, and if you're looking at different geographies and even if there's different forms of that free data, you're having to do this wrangling yourself, and there's a cost associated with doing that wrangling yourself. So this is where, in my view, I see a big part of the value proposition of the data marts or the data marketplaces is doing this wrangling, packaging it, and you're packaging it in these pre-built connectors, so that you can reduce that time, and that is the time to market issue, but it's also, you brought up also the ability to have different people with different skill sets being able to bring in this data. You still need to be able to interpret it. You still need to be able to add models and build models and tweak the hyperparameters and all that. But that is a big part of the time, the 75%. So yeah, so I'm a believer. I'm definitely a fan. Then the question, of course, is is what you're doing within that wrangling part, where, and I brought up the metadata a little bit earlier. This is super important, how you package that and so forth, to ingest it, because ultimately what people are going to need to do is take this data, ingest it into their application, do something with it, put it out to their data science, their AI, or their analytics. But there has to be that has to be as smooth as possible. And so let's talk about GDPR. We started the discussion with it, and now you're selling predominantly to companies. So I'm assuming that there's a contract, and within that contract, a legal contract, you are spelling out the use of this data, because each of your data sources, I'm assuming, are going to have different rights. And so you're handling that legal contract. The company that's going to be buying the data from you on a subscription, on a time-based subscription, is going to be signing a contract. Is this where all the magic's done for the GDPR, or is there more to it than the legal contract? And this is not small, by the way. I mean, I know it must be, the different I'm assuming there's different rights on different data. You have to consolidate that. You have to then legally put a contract around it, or using some technologies like distributed ledger technology, maybe to do the tracking. Talk to us a little bit about that whole thing.
Sure. Okay. Well, first and foremost, GDPR is really all around personal data, the processing and how those.
That's what I was saying. It's kind of company to company with a contract, but still.
Absolutely. So from a data market perspective, the kind of good news there is we don't hold any personal data in there, so it's kind of already scrubbed and cleaned in that respect.
All right. Well, thank you, Adam. Where can people find out more about Qlik? Where should they go?
Yeah, sure. So best place to start is our website. So that's qlik.com. So I'll spell that. That's Qlik.com. And you can find more information about us as an organization. Some of our sort of case studies are there as well. You can find more information on, and in particular, you can get some fun stuff there. You can we have some free stuff where you can download Qlik Desktop. There's a bunch of connectors in there as well. And in addition to that, I just wanted to call out, we've got Qlik Community, which is a great place to talk to your peers. Basically, we have over 100,000 people or users in the community. It's not just Qlikies like ourselves. It's our partners that are there, but also our customers as well. So it's a great, particularly for playing around for the first time with desktop and cloud, for example, it's a great place to sort of get answers for free, but also chat around with other people. So if you've got a particular question or any problem or something like that, community is a great place to go and start talking to your fellow peers. We've also got a whole host around data literacy. What is it? Including things like frameworks and things like that, and how organizations can start bringing data literacy into their own environment and raising up people's skill levels. So we're not saying make everyone a data scientist. That's an unreachable goal, but what we are saying is improve people's sort of comfort levels and ability to read, work with, are good. Yeah, exactly. Literally, data literacy. So there's some interesting programs coming on there, and there's more being added as well. So that's quite a cool thing to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah. Clicky. That's kind of funny. All right, for everyone, we're going to put all these. I'm going to ask Adam to send me these URLs. So if you want to, there's quite a few there, and it sounds like the community. That's a big community. I like the data literacy, and I think it's going to be important for people to be able to go to the data market and just play around with that. So come to the show analysis notes. All the links will be there. And with that, Adam, thank you. That was very informative and entertaining. I like the different stories. Maybe we'll throw a few URLs for the Earthstream and a couple of the C40 for people can read about that as well. All right, thanks, Adam.
Awesome. Thank you, Bruce. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Well, that was episode 115. Not a huge fan of the number since there's a 23 involved, but the show was good. To get an analysis of this episode, links to everything that was mentioned, plus the all-important transcript, just go to show analysis notes. They can all be found at iot-inc.com/podcasts. If you're new to this podcast, subscribe. That way you'll get every episode delivered straight to your device. And if you've been listening for a while, there are 4 ways you can support it. You can leave a rating or review on iTunes. Just go to iot-inc.com/iTunes. It only takes 1 click or a little bit longer if you're going to want to write your thoughts. You can share it on your blog, personal or company. You can share it on social. LinkedIn is the social network of my choice. Or you can sponsor it directly. Your company can reach everyone listening right now with an audio ad read on the show. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Until next time, may your path to IoT business be a nicely wrangled one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc Business Show.